Hi, I'm Jo Flanagan and I'm the CEO of Women's Health Tasmania. Welcome to an episode of She's Out There, a podcast series on women's health. This podcast is good for any woman in Australia, but it's really helpful if you live in Tasmania. There are resources to go with today's podcast available on our website. I'm still in the work car with Dr. Sue. If you have listened to the podcast on menopause, you will have met Dr. Sue already. We're here recording a podcast on LARCs, and they're not the birds of the morning either, it's another one. So if you haven't met Dr. Sue before, she's the Medical Director at Family Planning, and she also is a practicing GP, so a great combination of skills. Hi, Sue.
Hi.
So could you start by explaining to us what a LARC is?
So a LARC stands for long-acting reversible contraceptive. So it's general practices. There will be a GP within the practice who can put in and take out implants. IUDs, some GPs have got training in putting IUDs in. Public hospitals will put in IUDs and implants, and family planning. So we've got clinics in Burnie, Launceston and in Glenorchy where we do a lot of implant insertions and removals and IUD insertions and removals. Probably copper IUDs are a little bit more difficult to access in rural communities. There's not many GPs that put copper IUDs in, which is a pity because they're fantastic emergency contraception as well. So they would be a little bit more difficult to access, and you probably need to go to a family planning clinic for that.
So in your practice experience, why do some women choose implant and some choose IUDs? And
some women feel that an implant is a little bit easier to get in and get removed, and I think they're right. Really, to put an implant in, it's a very quick process. We put a little bit of local anaesthetic in under the skin, so that stings for a couple of seconds, and then you just pop the implant in. It comes in a big box because it's got a very clever delivery system with it. And to take it out, you just reverse the process, make a tiny little cut, and the implant just pops out. An IUD is a little bit more of an involved process. We put the IUDs in the rooms, and women tolerate the procedure extremely well. And as I say, convenience of lasting for 5 years is a big selling point for an IUD, and the fact that for a lot of women with a Mirena they're not going to get a period is another very big selling point for an IUD.
And what kind of cost are we looking at here?
So if people have a Medicare card, they're on a PBS, so they're a very, very effective method, cost-effective method of contraception. So one PBS script will last you for 5 years. In fact, this is completely off topic, Jo, but I'm old enough to remember that when Mirenas were first released, and they cost, I think, $375, and what the rep who was coming around said, we added up the cost of pads and tampons for 5 years, and you're still in front with a script for a Mirena, which seemed an odd selling point, but now they're just a normal script cost. So.
Appeals to the practical woman, I think.
Yes,
so.
yes.
Yeah. So how long do they take before they start working?
So they take 7 days before they become effective. But if you put them in the first 5 days of somebody's cycle, so day 1 is the first day of their period, so any time between day 1 and day 5, then they will start working immediately, but otherwise they'll take 7 days before they become effective.
Okay. And are there side effects that we need to know about?
Well, if we think about the implant, first of all, there is going to be a change in the bleeding pattern. Something I should have said, another advantage of LARCs is that they don't contain estrogen. So women who can't take estrogen, maybe they get migraines with visual disturbances, or that they have a history that means that it's not safe for them to take the pill, they are by and large safe to take the implants and the IUDs. But because they've only got the one hormone in them, they are going to get some irregular bleeding when they first start taking it. Most of the time that's going to settle down. And with an implant, you've got a 1 in 5 chance of getting no periods at all, which is quite safe for us to have no periods at all. You've got a 3 in 5 chance of your periods staying about the same, and you've got a 1 in 5 chance of your periods being a nuisance. But if you're in that 1 in 5 chance, there is medication that we can give you so that we can, by and large, make those periods settle down so that they're not a problem for them. With the IUD, You can get some crampy pain and some irregular bleeding when it first goes in, and it's really normal to get some spotting for a couple of months, but after that, the vast majority of women find that they get very light periods if they get anything at all.
So it is okay for our health not to have periods?
We're the only generation of women who expect to get periods as many as we do. It's if we think back to 60 years ago, before contraception was available, women would get married, get pregnant, no periods, then be breastfeeding for 7 or 8 months, then get pregnant again, and menopause happened much earlier. So we're this group of women who think that we need to have a period every month for decades, and there's absolutely no reason why we should do that. So yes, it's quite safe not to have a period every month.
I had always wondered how they managed periods in Jane Austen's time, that maybe they didn't as much.
I don't reckon they did.
So just a couple of questions about IUDs
Yes.
that we've been asked at various times. Can you have an IUD if you haven't had a baby?
Yes.
Yep.
Probably about 40% of the IUDs I put in are in women who haven't had a baby. And, a lot of women have been told, oh, you can't do that, or it's going to be much more painful or more difficult. My experience is that it isn't. It's actually quite easy technically to put an IUD in somebody who hasn't had a pregnancy. Really important to see your doctor for an assessment first, and you'll get some good advice about what to do to make that day a little bit easier for you. So we tend to suggest that people have had plenty to eat and drink, and that they've taken some painkillers about an hour or so before they come to see us. And we use a wheat pack as a warm pack on their tummies, which helps to relax the tummy muscles. And often if you go home and have a wheat pack on your tummy, that'll help too.
Would you say it's normal for women to be a bit anxious coming in?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's completely normal. You're going to have something done that you haven't had done before. You're not quite sure how you go. I always say to everybody, this is something that we do together. So there's always a nurse in the room. So the nurse, the doctor and the woman work together. And if at any point somebody feels like this is too much for them, they just tell us and we stop. And by the same token, if I think this is going to be a really difficult insert, I'll stop and have a conversation, and the nurse gets a vote between us too. And if a woman thinks, look, I really want to have an IUD, but I just don't want to be awake when I'm having that done, they can get a referral to the public hospital, and it can be done under sedation in the public system. There is a bit of a waiting time for that, but certainly, the IUDs can be great things for women, and they don't have to be awake when they've had it done. But I'll often say to people, look, why don't we just try and see how you go, knowing that at any time we can stop. And it's quite unusual to not be able to get an IUD in because a woman is finding it too difficult to tolerate.
That's good to know, though, that you can do that. One of their podcasts in this series is about reusable menstrual products. So
Fantastic.
we're quite interested in moon cups.
Yes.
Can you use an IUD if you use a moon cup?
Yes, you can. Yeah. Most of the time when an IUD has gone in, you know that the IUD sits up in the uterus, and that the threads come down about 2 centimetres out through the os, which is the cervix. And they don't tend to stay like that. They tend to curve up around the side of the cervix so that the threads are nowhere near where the menstrual cup is going to go. So I think often with menstrual cups they suggest that you break the suction a little bit before you reduce. It's exactly the same. You just break the suction a little bit before you remove it, and then there hasn't been any good evidence that people pull out their IUDs when they use the menstrual cups.
Okay.
And of course, with a Mirena IUD, you're not going to be getting a period, so your menstrual cup can stay in the cupboard.
So what do women know about LARCs? They seem to be a relatively new thing.
I think often they don't know, and I think that sometimes women go to the doctor and they say, I want to go on the pill. And they don't necessarily mean they want to go on the pill. What they mean is that they're having sex and they need to have a contraception, but somehow it seems a bit politer to say, I want to go on the pill. And it's often good to have that conversation with women about, that's fantastic, but we need to make sure that you've got the best contraception for you and your particular needs. So if an unplanned pregnancy would be something very, very difficult for a woman to cope with, then you're probably going to want to look for a method of contraception that is highly effective. Whereas if a pregnancy would be less of a drama, then you could probably use one of the less reliable methods of contraception. A lot of women, you're right, Jo, your comment about can women who've not had a baby have an IUD, that is a very common misconception. And as I say, I would think at least 40% of the IUDs I put in are in women who haven't had a pregnancy. There's no evidence that implanons or IUDs affect women's fertility going forward. One of the things that people used to do is that they would have the implanons and then they'd think I'd go on the pill for 3 months to get my periods back before I start trying to have a baby. Actually, the return to fertility when you take an implanon out or an IUD out is very, very quick. You can become fertile within 18 hours of taking an implanon or an IUD out. We often say, well, we do say to people, if we're replacing an IUD, you can't have sex for 7 days before we replace it, just in case we can't get the next one in. And sperm are tenacious little things and they can hang around and people get pregnant. But the point is that the return to fertility is so quick when you take implanons and IUDs out, so you don't need to sort of have another interim plan while you're starting to get ready to think about getting pregnant.
That's also good to know. So it strikes me in this conversation that you need different kinds of contraceptive at different times of your life.
Absolutely.
But we tend to go on one and stay on it for years and years and years, don't we? So, thinking about that and reviewing your contraception.
I think that's a really good idea, Jo, because you're right. People go, well, I've been on the pill, maybe I need to stay on the pill. What's right for you at one stage of your life may be completely different at another stage of your life. And sometimes people have had implanons when they've been very young and then they've had lots of spotting and it hasn't really agreed with them. That seems to be specific to that particular age or stage that somebody's at. So you could have an implanon a little bit later on and have no problems at all with it. I think it's just that openness to thinking, what is right for me at this particular stage of my life? Thinking that it may not be what it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
So good advice to women to, bring it as a conversation topic to their GP.
Absolutely.
Semi-regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably just one more last plug for IUDs actually is that Mirenas are fantastic for women who are in the perimenopausal transition, following on from our previous conversation, that if a woman is going to have HRT, they can use the Mirena IUD as the progesterone component of HRT. So you can get the contraceptive benefit and you can also get the HRT benefit from it too.
Oh, there you go, campers. There's a bit of good advice. So should we mention condoms, Sue?
Yes, we definitely should mention condoms. Implanons and IUDs and the pill are all good methods of contraception, but they're useless against protecting against STIs. The nicest people in the world can have an STI and not know that they've got it. Really important, particularly younger people are better at using and negotiating use of condoms. We see a lot of women in their 30s or 40s or 50s who've come out of long-term relationships who find it very difficult to or don't want to talk about condom use with new partners, and it's very, very important that we remember that contraceptives aren't protective against STIs, and the only thing that you can use to protect against STIs are condoms.